Anyway, this slide does represent a lot of what I'm going to talk about tonight, and so I'm going to be using the nomenclature about this. We all know that we're all familiar with the very small, a lot of times custom exempt, sometimes even very small state inspected, although there's not a state inspection system in Nebraska, or USDA inspected facility, but the very small. And I've got in here that a very typical size would be 10 to 20 beef equivalents per week. Then we step up from that and we go to a small facility, that's a half a load, 20 head, to 2 loads, which would be about 100, so somewhere between 20 and 100 head, which I classify as a small facility. Jumping up from there would be medium size, would be 300 to 750 head per day, and I think you're probably aware the Hastings facility would be about that size. There's a few others in the region about that size, but not a lot. Large plant, well, I could say the Gordon, Nebraska would probably become close. They're 200 head a day, but come close to that medium-sized plant. Large plants are 1,000 to 2,000. That would fit Nebraska beef, Greater Omaha, and then, of course, you've already heard about the newest publicity regarding a potential future North Platte facility. So that falls under the category of a large plant. And then you bounce up to the mega plants, which would encompass the Schuyler's Cargill facility, Dakota City, Lexington, the Tyson facilities. Those are all mega plants. I tend to spend a lot of my effort right in these three here. And then what we're going to talk about maybe towards the end is where central confinement is starting to concentrate, or their sweet spot kind of falls in this small half a load to 2 loads a day facility as far as built. But my brother, who will be talking tomorrow morning, and I really do work in this. This is our world right here. We spend a lot of time in that world. This slide is of all plants, all beef plants, 100 head per day and above. I put those up there. The clear ones don't really mean much here. They just, at the time, when I put the slide together, they don't have any plants that size in those states. But this is quite an interesting thing. As you probably expect, here in Nebraska, we've got a nice cluster of packing houses. In western Kansas, a nice cluster, and then the Texas Panhandle. This was our world. This is where almost 90% of the cattle being processed in the United States are. However, there's some strange things happening that are kind of interesting. What's happening in the fringe areas? For example, within the last 4 years, there was no plants in Idaho. Now there's going to be a third one in Jerome. Got a 500 head a day plant in Jerome, Idaho by AgriBeef. This is a 1,500 head a day plant. This is a 300 head a day plant. And then there's going to be a 500 head a day plant. Over here is a brand new, in fact, they just killed their first animals, Pleasant Hope, Missouri, 400 head a day plant. Buffalo Lake, Minnesota is right here. They just started, restart, it's a restart, several restarts, but they're just starting to process again. And of course, you've heard of expansion now at National Beef Packers here at Tama. There's an expansion down at FDL Foods near Augusta, Georgia. There's going to be an expansion at, there's another one that's going to be expanding as well. SDX down here at Corpus Christi is pretty much a restart, new. So you can see there's a whole bunch of publicity about expanded capacity in the United States beginning this last year. We don't know where the trend's going, but that's what we're going to talk about today. Why are we seeing this? Why are we seeing an increased interest in beef harvest capacity? I broke this down into these areas, but there's others as well. Since 2016, we've gotten into some pretty high beef packing margins. We have increasing trends and success of the buy local movement. I'm going to talk a little bit about what the buy local movement is. And then COVID-19, it resulted in increased internet purchases of beef. greater trust in buy local and that phenomena. And for a while, retail stores were the only supply of meat, and their supply was limited. The local butcher shops provided supply when the large retail companies could not. And then prior to 2020, the demand for custom processing was increasing. At the same time, the capacity for custom processing was decreasing. So that even if you were a producer producing and it wanted to find a place to process, you couldn't find it. And now we're getting some renewed interest in expanding that capacity again. And then the last one here, now state government support grants, and you've all heard of them. It's going to be true in Nebraska as well as neighboring states to help increase capacity, and there are a lot of people starting to take advantage of that. There may be one more added to this, and that would be the Tyson fire at Holcomb, Kansas. Really stimulated a lot of people's interest in expanding capacity because of the capacity issues and the effect on the cattle market that problem caused. The produce local is locally produced and processed in wherever state or region within the state. It usually involves high quality cattle. Meat products produced locally by people customers know and trust. It's a small and manageable beef supply, improving consistency and quality due to specific genetics and management. Monies earned would be kept locally, having a multiplication effect on the local economy. Meat products would be received fresh or freshly frozen, and fast delivery due to close proximity of the supplier. So that's what this locally produced phenomena is all about. And then communication between the customer and the supplier would be simple and easy. I went into the beef packing industry in 1993, and I've been monitoring this very, very closely. This slide represents from 1991 to 2008, and it was pretty consistent with a few exceptions. 1993 was an exception because of mad cow. Right here, it really made a really tough impact on the beef industry in 1993. And then the E. coli overreactions that happened about 1996, 1997 took a big hit in the marketplace. But aside from that, this was pretty consistent. We always figured that we would be making, on average, about $5 a head on every animal that's processed throughout those years. A little bit ups and downs, but this was an average, and always the second quarter of the year, which we are starting into now, starting in April, starts to get pretty good in the beef packing industry traditionally. But what's happened since then? 2009, it's been a steady growth. We got about 2016, very rapid linear growth. COVID hit here and it just skyrocketed. So we're up in that 350, 450, and so on margin right now in most packers. So it's been very good in the beef packing industry. So that is one of the things that is stimulating the capacity discussion. I'm going to go through a series of slides and just showing you a range of processing capacities that in the United States. This one is very crude. I took this about 3 weeks ago in North Carolina. This is a hoist system, and it's the crudest I've ever seen on-farm harvest trailer, where you shoot the animal, you put him up on this wooden platform, and you take him to a processing center and process him. Obviously, that's a custom exempt system, but it's very, very, very crude. This is very typical. You've seen plants like this. Very typical, very small plant in the U.S. Very old, unsightly. For example, here's all the byproduct barrels that you see back here. This particular place even had a little small retail. It was pretty pathetic. It's not in Nebraska, it's in Montana. But now things are changing. things are really changing, and I could show pictures of some facilities here in Nebraska that look really pretty good. This is a particular client of mine. I did the business plan. A group of producers in Monterey, Virginia, put this plant together. This is actually retail space right here. Nice plant, really a very attractive facility, and that goes to show you what some of these newer facilities are looking like. Pretty attractive, and there's going to be, you know, as you've probably seen, there's really an expansion of these type of facilities. But there are very, very few of these small, remember I said as small as a half a load to a load a day, 20 to about 100 head a day. You don't find them. This is a client of mine. I am an engineer for a building company. Before central confinement started, this is a particular builder in Idaho. This particular plant is in Wairika, California. We designed this layout to be a load-a-day plant. We also designed it to grind. We also designed it to portion control. We also designed it to smoke, cook. They have really done a growth spurt this last year since COVID, get to a point where they eliminating the cook, they're eliminating the grind, they're eliminating the portion control, and then just trying to get throughput through that plant. Other plants are now picking up that. But this is what my point here is: you don't see these size of plants. But we're going to start working and building these type. But where did this design come from? It came from right here. This is a 22 head per hour beef plant in New Zealand. Can you see the similarities? We based that on a New Zealand type design. And the point about New Zealand is this: New Zealand had gone away from the big packing houses to the small, where there are a lot more of them, but they're pretty attractive facilities, very highly efficient facilities. And we learned a lot from the New Zealanders. My wife and I spent a little time there a number of years ago. And this is one of the plants that we were in. This is another plant we were in. This is a 40 head per hour plant in New Zealand. About 350 head a day. This is a very common facility in New Zealand. So we're going to start seeing more and more of these type of facilities like this in the United States. Many plants across the entire spectrum of sizes grind under the same roof, it doesn't matter what size you are. You can find grinding under the same roof on the whole spectrum of beef plants. This happens to be a small one. This happens to be a big one. And we are a ground beef nation, correct? So grinding, we've got down to a science. We can always do it better, more efficiently, but that is something that is pretty consistent across the board in all these plants. Small and very small plants have become artisan. You all know them. You probably have some in your local community where they're either the custom exempts or very small inspected plants. They make wonderful products. Wonderful products. But as you grow in size, these things start to get eliminated because it's hard to stay on top of the volume when you get into more throughput. The challenges to building a meat passing plant, number one is the wastewater regulations and requirements. I usually classify as the most difficult hurdle to overcome. You've got wastewater regulations and requirements. Now you can do the municipality can treat those if you're located, and if they can handle it, they can handle the capacity of your pollution strength. You can treat yourself with a lagoon, but you have to deal with discharge permits, and my brother will probably talk to you a little bit about that in the morning. And then large plants, largely will do a mechanical plant, activated sludge, and let me tell you, those are millions and millions of dollars. So this is a problem regardless of the size. The bigger the plant, the bigger the problem. Labor, it's a problem again, across the board. I don't care where you're at. The recruitment, the training, and turnover, a problem in all size plants. Waste material rendering, you can render yourself if you've got a minimum of 1,000 head per day. But if you can't render it yourself, Rendering companies pick it up, oftentimes will charge, so it's a cost. It's not a, if you render yourself, oftentimes it does become a revenue generator, not here as you go down the size scale. A lot of plants are composting. One of those Idaho plants is a 300 head a day plant that I'm associated with, and they actually compost in that facility. It works pretty well. And then in a few situations can incinerate, but it's costly because fuel costs are pretty high. Food safety requirements are a problem, and they're a necessary problem. I'm not saying they shouldn't be. They're very important, but you still got, it is a challenge when you're building a plant, is these food safety requirements. And then operating capital. Oftentimes, sometimes it's easier to find the money to build the facility than to find and keep the money to operate them. And so I work very, very closely with clients on this issue because it is a huge issue. Food safety evolutions in plants, these are things that are happening and have been happening over the last few years. There's a mountain of paperwork and records required from plants. And that has increased the number of food safety employees needed. So if a plant had somebody that worked part-time over in the HACCP side or the food safety side, now they need 3. It's just that it just requires that much paperwork. A new option, which I'm excited about, and we have worked with, is a computerized paperless HACCP system available. Records are in a cloud, and it's available even to very, very small plants. And Cal, we were in a plant, Bellwood, not long ago, a very small plant that's already using that kind of a system. Kind of exciting. And they said they couldn't live without it, right? Humane slaughter, that execution is being watched very, very closely by FSIS. Why? Because FSIS is a bureaucratic government agency run by lawyers, and lawyers that probably have never been on a farm. And so they are being told, this is the truth, they are being told that their on-site inspectors have to watch this very, very closely. It requires discipline training and documentation are required, and you have to have that in order. And if you don't, you'll be shut down. Most plants in the U.S. have been shut down temporarily for inhumane slaughter. And you go back and you look at, you got shut down for that? The answer is yes. There is almost zero tolerance for any kind of a misknock when you are trying to render an animal desensitized. I mean, there is no room. I mean, the only way you get by with it is if the inspector's not watching. It's not to say that we shouldn't be very, very good at this, very skilled at this, but it's in a lot of ways it has gotten a little extreme. Then the last one I have represented here is BRC, which is a British retail consortium. It's an international food safety standard. It's now becoming important that all the way down to maybe even small plants are accredited, required by many customers. So the only way to get into certain customers is to be accredited by BRC. And that's similar if you're in the engineering world to ISO, if you're familiar with ISO. This is the food industry's ISO system, and it is hard. It's a very detailed procedure. It's hard. It's good. I'm not saying it's not good. It's very good. But it is something that most plants now have to go through. Refrigerated space for waste products in very small plants, waste, fat, bones, tissue, approximately. Think about that. There's about 600 pounds per animal of waste you got to get rid of in a plant. I just took this picture in a very small plant. This is refrigerated space. Remember that slide I showed you in that Montana? Oh, you sweet. I showed you that slide of the Montana plant with the barrels outside. You don't see that anymore. You have to put those in a refrigerated space. And as I showed right here, there's a lot of weight per animal that goes in those barrels. Well, the hide's not worth anything right now. The hides are even going in those barrels and going out to a rendering plant or a landfill. This is refrigerated space in a 15 to 20 head per day plant. A fairly new plant. You can see the facility looks pretty new. But again, this is something it's a liability. You have to get rid of this. And it makes it difficult to do. Harvest floor in a very small plant using a skinny bed is pretty much was the standard. It was the standard in very small plants is skinning on a bed. Now we've moved up to these half a load and loaded A plants. We're doing it all on the ramp. And that's because we figured out ways of doing that. It doesn't require really, really expensive down pullers. Retail sales at the plant is often a feature of very small and small plants. You all know them. Some are very attractive, some not so much. And I'm not saying they're good nor bad. It kind of is a matter of philosophy and location. If it looks like you've got a very attractive facility and you're close to a lot of traffic, then it probably makes some sense to put retail in. In some places it doesn't make sense. This particular is a client of mine. It is a beautiful facility. It's in Russellville, Arkansas, Cypress Valley Meats. Look how beautiful a facility that is. And it's attached to their beef plant, their processing plant. So if you're going to do it, my suggestion is do it right, make sure it is attractive and worth people coming to look at it. I put this in here because it's interesting. You don't see this every day. All three species hanging in the same carcass cooler in a very small plant. This happened to be in Massachusetts, but as you probably would expect, as you go up in size, you start eliminating the multiple species and get into the single species. USDA grading can now be done in small plants. However, as you see on the right here, this is camera grading. Really, that's too expensive in a small plant. But we certainly are starting to see now grading being done in these smaller facilities. Galen, that happens to be Chris Calkins. You probably knew that, right? All right, I want to talk about for a minute. I put this into 3 buckets of failures. I got to see this a lot in my career, and it's not pretty. The first one I want to, and these are not in any particular order. These are often failures that we see in these plants. Management. Seen a lot of dysfunctional boards, poor leadership, and or board ties to micromanage the operation. They tries, not ties, tries to micromanage the facility, and that does not work, and it usually leads long-term to failure. You are a general manager, inexperienced, not equipped or prepared, and what happens in that particular case? You spend a lot of money learning, getting this guy up to speed, and that burns through operating capital, and you know how valuable operating capital is to a business. Right, Dusty? Hiring of two, and then the opposite. Here's the opposite. And this happens too. Hiring of too costly, high salary demanding executives, that also becomes very, very stressful on operating capital because it all goes to executive labor. So we've seen a lot of this kind of thing, and unfortunately it usually leads to ruin. Working capital, wasted due to inexperience and problems, and just on the very, very beginning, when you're building your business and you're trying to collect as much operating capital to overcome problems, and you will have problems, you just don't have enough. If you're not cash flowing, and your bank knows you're not cash flowing, and you don't have enough operating capital protected, well, unfortunately, you lose credibility. You lose credibility in that business, and therefore, you can't keep running. They are going to keep funding you, so that oftentimes is the case of failure in this industry. And then this one, I'm talking to a group of cattle producers here today, but I want to tell you something. When marketing and sales are driven by livestock production and not sales, you're just going for failure. Going for failure. You know, I mentioned the grain-fed cow as an example of that. You know, everybody wants to process prime and choice steers and heifers. They don't always have the best margins. Sometimes it's a grain-fed cow. Sometimes it's just a lean cold cow. But if you're driven by livestock production and not sales, you don't see that. And again, you can ruin a business. You can't operate very long on negative margins. You've constantly got to watch margins and be able to be flexible to make any beef packing company work. New technologies used in beef packing. These are in the large and mega plants. I just wanted to share with you. Camera grading, that's not new. We've had it for some time. We typically will see that in the large and the mega plants. Tenderness classification is new, and that at chain speed, that's due to some science invented by University of Nebraska scientists in Galen's department. Exciting technology. It's going to be commercialized soon. It's going to be available in the industry. We're all pretty excited about it. That's just on line speeds, being able to classify whether a carcass is going to be tender or not. And then mechanization. This is factual. 20,000 head of hogs equals a meat yield of 6,000 cattle. And there's several very large 20,000 head per day hog plants in the United States. What's the difference between that and a 6,000 head of cattle facility? 1,000 less employees in the hog. And I could put poultry up here too. I could put poultry up there as well. What's the difference? It's mechanization. It's robotics. We don't have it in the beef industry yet. It's coming, and it's very expensive, but it's causing us a lot of efficiency issues. There will be a robotic split saw be available very soon. The price tag on that robotic split saw right now is $500,000 for one. And some of these big plants will need 2 or 3 of them. So you can kind of see what this is going to cost. This is available. Robotic loin drop is being used today. That's about $300,000. So we're starting to see it. It's starting to come, but it's really following the poultry and the swine industry. Now, this is the last couple slides. I just wanted to make this comment. This last 14 months, we've consolidated 4 areas and created what I call a one-stop shop for anybody interested in building one of these small plants. And that is myself, Food and Livestock Planning. We do the business planning and the technical strategies and the startups, help with the startups. My brother's company does the license stamping of all engineering designs, wastewater site design and permitting. He might talk about that a little bit tomorrow. Process Systems is Larry Gehring. He's somebody I've worked with probably for the last 10, 12 years. He is a plant designer based in Kansas. And then, of course, our host today, Central Confinement Services. And we've been pretty busy, Steve. As Steve mentioned this, that we've been pretty busy this last 14 months, and it's probably going to get a little busier, isn't it? And my last slide is that the sweet spot for that is right in here. This is where we've been working, right in this area right here. Not to say we don't have some interest in people asking questions here, and we certainly would look at something like this, but this is really where this is the kind of our sweet spot to date. And as we get a little bit more and get some plants under our belt there, we probably will advance up the chain. All right, we okay on time, Steve?
Yep, we're good.
Are we going to have just room for some questions? Or do you take them later? Any questions? Yeah. you got 3.3 times larger size and weight. And on these robotic systems, it just takes a lot, it's based on size and weight. That's the reason. The robotic split saw is just a larger version of the hog version of the robotic split saw. But they perfected it in swine, and now we're starting to work with it in beef. Yes, right here.
So if you look at the cattle industry, our herds are basically flat, number of head slaughtered per year, maybe slight growth. As we see additional space come on, whether it be small, medium, or large, where is that capacity coming from? Is it coming from the mega plants? Is it coming from the small plants? Where's the shift up of the industry?
The shift right now is in the large, 1,000 to 2,000. You will probably never, no shit, you never say never, right? Never see another mega plant built, mainly because of what my brother's going to talk about tomorrow, and that's just the environmental impact. And not just environmental, just other things too. Just the human resource needs for those mega plants are too hard, it's too difficult. But you're starting to see a lot more of those 1,500 head plants come on. I would say somewhere between that the new one in Jerome, Idaho, 500 head. Of course, you've seen the one advertised in North Platte, 1,500 head. The newest plant we have in our country is a 1,500 head plant at Cuner, Idaho. And I will be up there on the 27th of this month, or of April. So that's the newest. There's kind of where you see the expansion coming from, is more of those.
So
Yeah.
one follow-up question to that. The mega plants have been very aggressive in the industry. With those margins that we're looking at, what's the risk of acquisition of these farms?
Well, it's there. Case in point is National buying the Tama facility. That's a case in point, right? And that could continue. Is that a risk? I don't know. Hopefully, that whoever is selling that to them is doing well in their own right. But I'm assuming that will happen. That will definitely happen. But if you look at some of the ones that are being built right now, they aren't always the large ones, and some of these have been, Greater O, Nebraska beef, those have resisted being taken over by the large packers, and I predict that will continue to happen. There was a question back here, I don't know if I answered. Yeah.
So, in a small plant, where do they market that beef, or what market do you go after?
Yeah, I put those in kind of three categories. One is that you are also actually marketing processing services to that huge chasm that we have with there's just seems a shrunk capacity for providing custom services to other producers. So that's where some of it's going. It's not selling a product, you're selling a service. That's one. Number two, this to meet local demand. That's number two. That local demand can be both food service, which is the restaurants, or local retail. Even look at Cisco, the largest food service purveyor in the United States, leaves room for some local purchases for their customers. They leave a gap in the contract. We're starting to see some of that, more and more of that. The third one is some of this will actually filter into large purchases on I can always go to that small plant. I need 5 boxes of inside rounds, and I can't get it from Tyson, Cargill, they're sold out. I can always approach this small local processor. So kind of a backup to some of the larger customers. These smaller people can provide that as a service. So those would be 3. There could possibly be more. Good, that's an excellent question. Thank you very much.